When you invest in yourself, you invest in your future. Number one, take some time out of your busy lives to disconnect from your world. Shut your cell phone off, turn the TV off, power down your computer, sit your body down for a few minutes and close your eyes. Number one. Number two, take some breaths and center yourself. When you center your attention into the present moment, you have more energy to create with. When your mind wanders to the predictable future or the familiar past, that's normal. Just become aware of it. Keep working on settling yourself back down into the present moment. When you're in the present moment, you're the most creative. Number three, ask yourself, can I be defined by a vision of the future instead of the memories of the past? What do I want in my life? And take the time to answer the question. As you begin to contemplate and think about the answer to the question, you're changing your brain. When you make your brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, that's the beginning steps of changing your mind. Next, decide on the emotions you'll feel when you begin to create that future. And teach your body emotionally what that future is going to feel like. And don't get up until you begin to feel those emotions. Next step, step number 4, rehearse in your mind who you're going to be when you open your eyes, the things you have to do, the choices you have to make, the steps you have to take, and review them over and over again. Number 5, you can't go to the future holding on to the biology of your past. Decide what thoughts you can bring to your future. Write them down. Thoughts like, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change, I'll start tomorrow, what's wrong with me, it's someone else's fault. Decide on what behaviors or actions or unconscious habits you have to change. How do you talk? Do you complain? Do you blame? Do you make excuses? Do you feel sorry for yourself? Just become so conscious of those behaviors that you'll never go unconscious again. And lastly, you have to decide what emotions no longer belong in your future. That means if you want to be wealthy, you can't take lack. If you want to be healthy, you can't take insecurity or fear. You got to begin to condition your body to a new mind. If you do this every single day, your personality creates your personal reality. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. Change any one of those things and you change your life. And begin to measure the effects of you it cause. Give it a shot. So when we begin to overcome those emotions of stress that are highly addictive, the body is no longer being tormented like an addict. That is when the body starts to liberate energy. And that's when our heart starts to open. And that's when we start to believe in possibility again. So if our personality creates our personal reality, we make a decision first. We examine who we've been, and I call it crossing the river of change, from the old self to the new self. And if you understand that that void, that unknown, is the perfect place to create in, that's the place you want to create in, and not to fear it, but to embrace it. And your body's craving the familiar chemicals that it's addicted to, then you might want to say when you're in that place, well, the best way to predict my future is to create it, not from the known, but from the unknown. Now, this perfect place of creation is where people begin to do the uncommon. This is where their soul begins to speak to them. This is where they see a greater purpose for themselves in their lives, and they're no longer playing by the small-minded games any longer because they're connected to some bigger vision in the future. I think transformation is really the one thing that I'm more passionate about than anything else. And so I think number one, taking time out of our busy day for ourselves is the greatest service that we can do for ourselves, for our family, for the people we work with, and for our community. Now, if most people's attention is on their external environment, on their body, and on time, and they wake up every morning and they get out of bed and they do the same thing they've been doing for the last 20 years, then their body's already programmed into a predictable future. Their body's already on autopilot. They have a thought of the coffee pot, and the next thing they know, they have coffee in their hand. They have a thought of the shower, the next thing they know, they're in the shower.
They've thought about going to work, the next thing you know, they're in the car. So their body is following their mind. If they're living by the same emotions every single day, then their body, for the most part, is in the past, because emotions are a record of the past. So finding the sweet spot of the present moment in our meditation is so highly important, because the body has been trained to be in the future. So then most people, when they take their meditation and they stick it in as another thing to do so they don't have to feel guilty, that's not the answer either. Working with your body and understanding that it's the animal, and we do this in our workshops. We make people, we don't make them, we ask them in their meditations to really get to that point where they're unfolding in that infinite field of potentials as thought alone. In other words, if you're going to heal yourself by thought alone, or create something in your life by thought alone, then you have to become thought alone. This is the key element where all of a sudden now, when you keep practicing bringing your body back into the present moment, and you become aware that it's thinking about, well, what about this thing I have to do, and this plane I have to catch, and this contract I have to sign, and that person I have to call, that's a predictable future. And you become aware that you're investing your energy into that reality, because where you place your attention is where you place your energy. Or you're living by some emotion of impatience or frustration or vigilance, then you're siphoning energy out of the present moment, and you have no energy to create with. So every time you become conscious that you're moving out of the present moment, and just like riding an unbridled stallion, every time you bring that body back into the present moment and you relax it back down into the present moment and you surrender into nothing, every time you do that, you're reconditioning your body to a new mind. In other words, you're not allowing your body to become the mind. Now, people will say, well, that's going to take a lot of work. And I say to them, well, what's the alternative? Nothing is going to help you to get to the present moment but you. And if you practice being present every single day in your meditations, you will be more present in your life and less preoccupied with that worst case scenario, that moment where something could go wrong, and living by those hormones of stress. And your body then finally starts to trust you. And when your body finally starts to trust you is the moment it's not worried about the unknown. The unknown is no longer dangerous. The unknown is actually an adventure. So we do the work in teaching people how to find the present moment. And when they begin to distinguish between when you're present and when you're not present, and they're able to do that well enough, they'll know the moment it's time to create. Now, this funny thing happens if you really lock into the present moment. All the things you thought you wanted, you no longer want, because you feel so whole in that moment, it's impossible to want. Now, then the next step is to teach your brain and body emotionally what a new future is going to feel like. In order for you to do that, or in order for us to do that, we have to become conscious about how unconscious we are. And we've been talking about that. The more you don't allow that thought, that behavior, that emotion to slip by your awareness, the more prone you are to be Gandalf on the bridge. And that monster that he was facing symbolically was all of his energy that was invested in the ego and in the old self. And when the God within us stands up and says, "You may not pass ever again," that's the moment that the soul begins to speak. And so we do the work every day to present ourselves as a greater expression of ourselves every day. And in the beginning, it will feel unnatural, but I swear there's been hundreds of people, once they start seeing the effects and they find true joy within them because they're pleased with themselves and they got beyond themselves. I mean, in the brain scans that we studied with people, I can tell you that when people get beyond themselves, they are so incredibly powerful. And by the way, they tell the story based on those emotions. And Scientific American said 3 months ago that 50% of everything that people talk about in their past is a lie. It's not the truth, because they have a different brain today than they did at the time of the event. So getting people beyond their past, I think, and getting them into the present moment begins to liberate the most amount of energy. So then, how do we begin to become supernatural. We have to begin to do what's unnatural. And when everybody else is in lack and in poverty, that is the time to give. When everybody else is in fear and worried, that's the time to demonstrate courage. When everybody else is judging and warring, that's the time to show love and compassion. And if we keep doing the unnaturals long enough, sooner or later we'll begin to become supernatural. So our soul's journey then is to step out of the quagmire and the limited beliefs and perceptions that keep us playing in this limited realm, this limited density, where we are matter trying to change matter. Once we get a taste of the divine, and that divine, again, we've measured this over and over again. When you are that thought in that infinite space, when the brain is perceiving space and no longer perceiving objects, it gets very organized. It gets very coherent. And when the brain gets coherent, we get coherent. And when the heart gets coherent, we love way more. And that's when we begin to emulate the divine. So over and over again, as we begin to climb out of these limited states, and we break free from those survival emotions that keep us feeling more like matter and less like energy, the side effect of all of that is becoming more energy and less matter. And the field around our bodies when we're living in stress is about 3-4 inches in size. Open your heart, it can be up to 9 meters wide. We measured. And so then when you begin to open your heart, you feel connected to something greater. That's the beginning. That's when the soul says, now I have infinite possibilities to experience, and I get to select as a free-willed individual where I want to place my attention. That's when we're liberated. So I think it's a great time for us to begin to really embody this information. When you can find an identity of yourself in the quietness and solitude of your own presence, that's when you're no longer seduced by the external world, and that's when you begin to experience true freedom.